I think most people who live in Canada have run across people who immigrated here because of the Vietnam War, and there seems to be a lot of socially conscious people who came up during that time. And I remember it started when I was 15. I started worrying about the draft, and that was even before we were officially involved in Vietnam. A friend of a neighbor came home in a box, and we weren't even there. And then even prior to that, in the 50s and 60s, France was in Vietnam, but the majority of funding for the war from France to Vietnam came from the United States. And when I turned 18, I started fighting the draft as a conscientious objector and went through many physicals and finally refused induction a couple of times, and that's when my case was turned over to the FBI. And I was working in a music store in San Diego, and the FBI had came to arrest me, and I wasn't sure. I was pretty sure I was going to go to jail. I was preparing for that for the 4 or 5 years I was facing the draft. I was about 21 by then. But I changed my mind at the last minute about coming to Canada because of a pamphlet I read that was written to encourage people to go to jail. It was written by the Quakers, and the life in jail looked quite scary to me, and I did, because of my kind of middle-class background, I had the advantage as to finding out that Canada was an alternative. And talking with Quakers and Unitarians, I reached a San Diego professor who put me in touch with the Underground Railroad, and I was sent to Seattle and helped by a Quaker, and then a Unitarian minister finally brought me across the border, where after several weeks, I became a landed immigrant. It was fairly easy back then, although for deserters it was never easy, because they were often from more of a working class background and didn't have couldn't access the knowledge to say get out of the draft, and maybe they felt as if they'd be facing working for McDonald's for 4 or 5 years, or going in the military and a possible free education and so on. But that goes back to, I feel as if that was an economic draft as well. And when I arrived in Canada, after a few months, I opened a hostel. I went to a group called the Committee to Aid American War Objectors, and they helped me get landed immigrant status. And as I said, after I'd been here for a while, I opened a hostel for deserters and draft dodgers, and I lived with about 6,000 deserters during that time, and draft dodgers. And it was always harder for the deserters because they came from a different economic background. But most people eventually did get legal status. It's as it is, almost impossible to do today. And you look back at some of the statistics about the United States has invaded 27 countries since World War II, and we killed 3.5 million Vietnamese, which is, if it were compared to Canada, it would be the same as killing everyone in British Columbia. So I was glad that Canada was offered as a refuge, but I never found a huge amount of encouragement. It was more people were accepting if you were a contributing member of society, and I think Canada did gain interesting people and socially relevant people. And I've noticed of all those people I counseled, I often run across people who are in every walk of life, but a lot of teachers and social workers and political people and bus drivers and every other walk of life. So there was almost as many reasons as coming to Canada as there were people. But in a negative way, it worked as a steam valve, because if all those people had been forced to remain in the United States, there might have been more resistance to the war. Nonetheless, I was very happy to, I would have done 2 years in jail or go to Vietnam. And coming to Canada, my own thoughts have always been, I wish I'd have come sooner, because as soon as I crossed the border, a great relief came over me, because since I was 15, I'd been worried about having to kill people or be killed. And when I came across the border, I realized I was free from that possibility. And so 42 years later, I'm doing the same thing, trying to help people from a different war. And I was hoping maybe I could retire from all this, but I think as long as people are trying to avoid war and out of conscience, I'm willing to help them. And I think that's all I have to say.